Chris, and welcome to Brent and Chris Talk.
We are back again.
We have passed our 1 month mark.
Yeah, man. It's flying by faster than I would have ever thought. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And having fun all the way.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I've learned a lot about different topics. Everything we've talked about for sure. I think this is probably the topic I know the least about. Just offhand in terms of tribal knowledge, if you will.
Sure.
But I again learned a lot, and I think it's going to be a good week.
So what are we doing this week?
Well, I think we should talk about how your week was first.
That's great. We'll dive into that. Honestly, I had a pretty good week. I had some frustrations with my bank, but I'm working them out. And
never a good time.
Fun. Yeah, just, mysterious withdrawals and
See, I think it was a movie I heard once where it said playing with my money is like playing with my emotions, and I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
It really ticks me off when that kind of stuff happens, and you got to go in there and get it taken care of fast, otherwise you get stuck.
And everything just takes so much time nowadays. Like automated services just suck up your time.
Yep. I hate automatic payments. I do them, but I hate a lot of them because you get so complacent, and then all of a sudden 1 month it changes to this, 1 month it changes to that. You start looking back, you're like, what's up with my discount? And then you get into this whole argument with them, and then it's a hassle.
I know, everything starts going up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They always get you. Well,
how was your week?
It flew by at lightning speed as usual, but it was pretty good overall. I'd say it was just fast, quick. There's so much going on, playing with the kids, going outside, but you get in your routine, and it's like Monday to Friday is gone, and then, it's definitely a ton of fun with the kids, and I think that, when Courtney and I get some time to do our own thing too, it's just that goes that much faster because it's so much few and far between. So.
Yep.
Yeah, just looking forward to the weekend and doing some hanging out.
Yeah, so this will be posted on holiday, but hopefully you guys are still checking us out.
Maybe. Yeah, we're not going to labor on Labor Day for this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We'll post it on Labor Day, but...
So you'll be laboring.
Yeah, I will be.
But it will be...
For the cause.
Exactly. Worthy cause.
Yeah, right.
So, this week's topic.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. This is another one that has many a rabbit hole.
Oh, man. Yeah. And there's a lot of great things that we could talk about related to it.
And horrible things.
Well, great things in terms of things to cover, but a lot of them are horrible. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But we've talked about it, and there could be chapter 2s and 3s and whatever else we may see. We'll just see how it goes. But I think we have a good, story to tell for the first pass.
Yeah, I mean, we're only going to try to cram 500 years into this, so no big deal.
This will only be like a 6-week podcast, so buckle up.
So we're going to talk about mental health. Mental health in America, especially mental health through history, and mental health in politics.
Yeah, so much.
And I'm going to steal your analogy.
Yeah.
We're going to be gliding our plane today, our show.
Yeah.
Allow us to be your captains. And we will be landing and coming back up from certain topics.
Yep, we're going to cruise along with mental health as the main topic, but then we're going to touch down at different things we really want to highlight and cover. And yeah, this is your co-captain speaking. Please make sure your tray tables are in their upright position and you have your seatbelt fastened.
Here we go. So a couple things that led us to do this show, or why we felt it was important. There are 45 million Americans suffering from mental illness, and that includes depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, PTSD, and that's in this country as of, I believe it was 2016, or 2015, excuse me. Now, the other statistic we found troubling is less than 40% of those people are getting treatment.
Right.
And, if this was like any other sickness or illness and less than 40% of the country was getting treated for it, it would be an outrage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very underappreciated, underfunded, under-researched, under-serviced community.
Over-stigmatized.
Yeah. There's so many reasons for why it's under-serviced, and I think we're going to get into a lot of those specific issues and why we've gotten to the point we are today, how at points in the past, we've probably done better than we are today.
Now, one of the other big problems as we go through our historic journey, if you will, is that what qualifies for mentally ill is changing.
Yeah.
Because,
in terms of definition?
Yeah, definition, qualifications.
Yep.
Along those lines. So, let's just start. In the 1600s, it was just community. We were communities, right? And it's so terrible to quote this, but it's a good reference. Monty Python, they joke about the village idiot.
Yeah.
There was an acceptance that there was just...
some people.
Mentally crazy people in the communities.
Right. They probably were treated more as crazy than...
Yeah. And we're gonna clean up our words as we move into the...
Yeah. Don't take it as saying that mentally ill people are crazy.
Yeah, we're just working with what we got here.
Yep.
So, we're gonna... 100 years. That was fast, right?
Yeah.
100 years. We're in the 1700s. Now we have colonialism.
Yep.
And this includes the industrialization, and now we see the almshouse. That's where, poor / mentally ill are taken and stuff.
Okay. Is that kind of like a charity house?
That would be very charitable.
Oh, charitable definition. Okay.
Yeah.
Not a very pleasant place.
No, and what we're doing is we're also putting the mentally ill in prisons. We're locking them in cages, chaining them to the walls, and in 1809 we see this idea for a moral treatment, and this was introduced by Pinnell. It was a psychiatrist. The idea was that the social environment as well as the biological influence could help change and cure the mentally ill.
Okay.
And this would include, well, let's just go forward to 1812. And next we have the next big breakthrough, and this was from Ben Rush. And Ben Rush, found that, these are not demons in us. The mentally ill are not caused by demons.
So they separated the religion from the science piece of it?
Yeah, right. And he thought that some of the mental illness had to do with sensory overload, and he would do things like bloodletting, purging. He had a trance chair where they would basically strap you to a chair and put a box over your head just to remove any sensory stimulus from yourself. And not great.
So, still very medieval type solutions.
Right, and again, if we have asylums at this point, they're few and far between, and they are, not operating at capacity, which this is the one thing you're going to hear repeated at every time we think we have enough treatment in place, we always find that it's not enough. It's the one theme you're going to keep hearing here.
Yep.
So, 1841, we have to talk about Dorothea Dix.
Yep.
Dorothea Dix in mental health in America and asylums is huge. It would be a disservice to not mention her. So she's born in 1802 and dies in 1887. Spoilers. But she founded or expanded more than 30 hospitals directly. More than 30 mental hospitals for the treatment of mentally ill in states. She was born in Maine.
Wow. To
a Methodist pastor. Not a happy childhood. Moves to her aunt in Boston, who's very well-to-do. She actually starts a school in her aunt's house in 1821. 1831, she opens her own school in her own home.
Mm-hmm.
And 1836, she's suffering depression. Going through a bout of depression. And she goes to England. Takes a restorative trip. I love the way they say that, to England. That sounds nice.
Yeah, sure.
I got 2 kids. I could use a restorative trip to anywhere.
Times.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
So she goes to England, where she stays with, do you know this name? William Rathbone.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar.
It's in Fall of Giants.
Okay.
Yeah, he is in the House of Commons. He's a liberal, liberal guy in the House of Commons. So, me and Brent read this book series by Ken Follett called, is the whole series Fall of Giants? Or it's
like the Century Trilogy, I think is what the 3 books are called.
3 books. It's historical fiction. First one is World War I, which is Fall of Giants. And then we have World War II, which is...
Oh, man.
Ooh, World Without End? No, that's the other series he does.
Yeah. I don't remember offhand.
And it's really good.
Yeah.
Don't let this...
They're all good. The fact that we can't remember... I mean, they've been out for a while.
Yeah, and third one is Winter of
the World.
Winter of the World, which isn't George R. Martin's, right?
Man. If we mix all this up, we're going to correct that in the comments and make sure that people have access to this book series if you're interested. But lots of good things in terms of details along with fictional characters. So a lot of historical facts, but characters interacting with those times and places and people.
Brent and I do a lot of audiobooks. If you would ever like us to do audiobook reviews, we are all about that.
Sure, definitely. Done a ton of them.
Yeah, or if our shows are long enough, we just won't.
Yeah, and if you don't like hearing our voices, and that's okay too. We won't read those books or talk about them. So
Dorothea Dix.
Yeah, we got to get back to that.
So she goes to England, she stays with William Rathbone, and she returns to Boston in 1837, shortly after the death of her grandma.
Okay.
Now, the inheritance she gets from that ends up supporting her for the rest of her life and her causes. And in 1841, she's teaching a Sunday school class at the East Cambridge Jail for Women.
Okay.
And as she's leaving, she finds there's a cell with mentally ill women in there, and it has no heat.
Wow.
And she goes to the warden and tells the warden, and the warden responds to her, lunatics can't tell the difference between hot and cold.
Wow.
And this was, I mean, not like one man's crazy beliefs. This was like
Accepted norm.
status quo right
Wow.
now. So that right there changed history. And Dix focused on the treatment of the mentally ill from then on after.
Okay. So it kind of drove her passion for taking care of these people the right way, or trying to figure out the right way.
Correct. And she does the best she can. In 1843, Dix gives a petition to the Massachusetts legislature to pay for the expansion of the state insane asylum in Worcester.
Okay.
Now, in this time, women have, like, no rights. And so she can't even read it. She has
Sure.
to get a man to read it.
Yeah, right. Represent her cause.
Now, I really recommend that you go read this letter. It is beautifully written. I'm going to read one small section that is just a good summary of where we're at in 1843 with the mentally ill.
With her cause.
So, quoting, I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons confined within this commonwealth, in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, lashed into obedience. End quote.
Terrible.
And it doesn't get much better, the letter, but it does draw more specific, more instances into better detail. So It gives a better light if you're interested in that. Now, she was able to then expand the Worcester State Lunacy Hospital.
Okay.
And
So that action did something for
yes.
folks. Good.
And so then she takes her show on the road, man. She goes to Rhode Island, New York, then moves to the pro-slavery states in the South. In a 3-year period, she travels 30,000 miles.
Wow. That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Especially for that time period.
That's 3 oil changes.
That's a lot of traveling, too. I'm sure that was not comfortable traveling.
right. To believe in something that much, to do it.
Wow.
And so, I have one neat story about her. While she's in the southern states, she's dealing with the government, right? And she hears of a plan to overthrow the Union by blowing up some rail cars, and then an assassination attempt on Lincoln. She hears about this plan. So she goes and she tells some high-ranking Union people who she knew in other states.
Okay.
They get the Pinkertons to go down and investigate, find out it's a credible clause. They pull Abe Lincoln out of the place the assassination was supposed to happen at, and they actually arrest the people and foil this plot.
Jeez.
So
she already made a mark in history, just saving the president's
same
life.
president. And Mr. Lincoln, President Lincoln doesn't forget. And the
So he
Civil
gets an
War
ear.
breaks out, and we have Fort Sumter falls, and Dix volunteers to, help for the cause. And Lincoln names her the Superintendent of Women Nurse on June 10th, 1860.
Wow.
Or, well, it wouldn't be. It'd be 1861.
Somewhere in there.
So, Interesting other story with her. Lincoln's gets his two youngest kids. They get tuberculosis from bad water lines that go into the White House.
Wow.
Yeah, and so Dorothea Dix comes and says, "You want me to bring a nurse?" And this is while the Civil War's going on. And Lincoln says, "No, keep the nurses where they are." And he ends up losing his first son, and Willie died. And after that, Dorothea Dix comes back, and Lincoln says, "Could you please send me a nurse?" And she sends this Rebecca Pomeroy, and she took care of Todd, and then after Todd, Tad. Sorry,
Tad didn't make it either, right?
No, he made it.
He did?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then she had to stay and kind of help Mary because she lost her son.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's terrible.
And so this is Dorothea Dix, and she obviously didn't get along well with the doctors.
Right. Who were prescribing beatings and whatever else.
Well, no, just in the war, like the war doctors who were like, because
being a nurse
during the nurse and this,
Okay.
yeah, they were basically, they weren't nurses. Like she never had medical training. She was a teacher, and she got to be the supervisor of all the nurses.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but she was a smart woman, and she used to sit with like dying soldiers, and she wrote this quote after holding a dying soldier's hand: "This war with my country is breaking my heart."
Yeah.
I think it's just always important to remind ourselves that we've been at war with ourselves.
Oh yeah, and
it's
how
terrible.
How good we have it, and
Yep.
should try to keep things versus letting things degrade.
Now, she dies in 1887, Dorothea Dix. By the time of her death, there were 110 more mental health hospitals in the country than when she got into the cause in 1841.
Wow.
And she actually died in one of the state hospitals she helped expand in New Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah. So she helped fund or help expand all these institutions, and they, in their first generation, did a great job of getting the mentally ill out of the prisons.
Right.
Like she believed that the mentally ill and the convicts should not be living together.
Sure. Seems logical.
Seems logical. Something that we've kind of reverted on in present day. But by the 1870s, so towards the end of her life, there's a lot of scandals that pop up in the books or in the world. In 1860, there's a woman named Elizabeth Packard, and this is in Illinois, not too far from us. In 1860, her husband has her committed, which is in accordance with the law, and this is because she has different religious views than him and disagrees with her, basically, and argues with him.
Wow.
And so he was able to have her committed, and she was committed for 3 years.
So to an asylum?
In Jacksonville Insane Asylum in Illinois.
Wow.
And she never admitted to being crazy, and her daughters pushed and pushed to, petition to get her out. And finally, she was deemed uncurable, and then they let her out.
So they just give up. You're uncurable, so here you go. Have her back.
Yeah, dude. And so everyone kind of knows about this story, and they know that she goes on to write a book. And that's the part I know. She writes a tale about what it was like in the prison.
To be in there.
Yeah, it's a best-selling book. It details, beatings, chokings, forced ice water baths, and just...
It's like, to what end? Are you going to beat the person back to be
right? The
normal
asylum
or
started off as a
sane or
great
whatever?
way to get the mentally ill off the streets and stuff like that. And the idea was to build a place for them and give them this, nurture nature therapy. And Dorothea Dix had this idea that if you could catch someone's mental illness early on and get them into an asylum, in 4 to 6 months they would be cured. And it would be like treating a common cold. And there's this great quote from a documentary I watched, and I'll link it to it. And it says, after a while it became clear that they weren't getting better.
Yeah.
And so the people are overworked. There's no holidays, vacations, there's no nothing. These places become overcrowded. The funding is there, but it's not enough. And it starts to almost become like the prisons were. And
yeah.
so Elizabeth Packard writes this book. So after she gets out, though, of 3 years in this asylum, her husband locks her in a room and nails all the windows shut. She has to sneak a letter out of the slit in the window down to a friend who gets the letter to a judge, and the judge calls for a trial, and she is found not crazy, not in any way unfit, and is ordered to not be locked in the room anymore.
Wow.
And so by the time she gets home, though, the husband had rented the house out to other tenants and taken her kids and moved to Boston. Moved to Massachusetts.
Wow.
And at this time in history, women had no rights to property. She couldn't do anything to get her kids back.
Yeah.
So in 1867, she goes and gets, she petitions like congressmen in Illinois and passes the Bill for Protection of Personal Liberty, and it guaranteed all people accused of insanity had the right to a public trial. And in 1869, she petitions Illinois and Massachusetts legislature to allow married women equal rights to property and custody of their children. So she gets a lot of credit for the book, but she did a lot more than that.
Wow.
And so Dorothea Dix, Elizabeth Packard.
Wow.
These are important things.
Major players.
To mention. Yes, exactly. So let's talk about the treatment where we're at now. At this point, they're doing things like shock therapy. They'll do things like insulin shock. They'll give you like too much insulin to make your body go into shock because they believe it'll help restart your body. And these are like the precursors to electroshock therapy.
I wonder how many people they killed doing that stuff.
It got bad, and this is the thing. There are so many dark things, like very, very dark history that comes with this. And we don't want to go too much into that darkness. But one thing to talk about, in 1800s to 1970s, there were things called ugly laws. And it was illegal for diseased or maimed, deformed people to be exposed themselves in public view. And this was caused to lock people up. And again, husbands could have their wives committed. Like, we were at a very not understanding place. At this point in history, we're still in early 1800s, early 1900s. We are getting people in there with syphilis that have late stages syphilis, and that causes dementia, and they couldn't do anything about it. So they would deal with people with that. They would deal with alcoholics, people who had addiction problems. They were dealing with people with brain tumors. They were dealing with schizophrenics, bipolars, and they just thought that this ice therapy, or they thought because they found that in syphilis end stages, if they had a super high fever, they stopped appearing to be insane. So they would start putting people in hot boxes to try to cause high fevers.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, things are not great. We're
Talk
pretty
about
much
like the same as bloodletting, like maybe slightly better.
Exactly. And,
Wow.
And this goes on, like Huntington's disease, I guess, is like dementia. I feel bad. This is not where the research took me, but there were places where, in America, where doctors were just like cutting ribs out of people and putting balloons in the lungs. Like, again, they were playing around
Just
with
trying to
people
experiment,
who
seeing.
could not speak up for themselves, had no one to defend themselves or anything.
Jeez.
The other absolutely horrible thing we're just going to kind of gloss over is eugenics. There was this idea that people needed to be sterilized so they couldn't spread this. And the law, if you look up the laws for this, it's defined very loosely. It's called like... there's one in Virginia, the Virginia State one. It says basically imbeciles could be removed. Their genitalia could be removed so they couldn't procreate.
Wow. So just trying to cull the herd kind of thing.
Cull the herd. And again, they weren't like these weren't real diagnoses. Like, they were idiots, imbeciles, and I don't remember what the other one is. And that's in the legislature.
Just throwing out slang, and then you could just throw them under whichever term you want, and then that's how you could do whatever you wanted with it to them. That's just terrible.
So we have a mental hospital here in Peoria. Well, it was in Bartonville, pretty close to us.
Yep.
And sorry, we're in the United States. If anyone's listening outside the country, Welcome. So let's talk about the Zeller treatment. We had Zellers, but first we had the Peoria State Mental Hospital.
Okay.
Zeller is a interesting guy because he took over the Peoria State Hospital in Bartonville November 1st, 1902, and then later he had to move out when a Republican moved in, or when a Democrat governor came to office. He was removed, then put back in. But he was ahead of his times.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things he did when he took over the Peoria State Mental Hospital was he took the bars off the windows and made an animal enclosure. And the public and the patients could go look at animals and stuff like that. He had a policy that the doors were kept open. There would be no solitude. He followed the cottage plan, which instead of people being locked up in one big building, there were tons of little buildings.
Okay.
He set up a barber and a hairdresser, or I don't remember what's it called, a women hairdresser, and then a barber. He introduced music and dances.
Huh.
It was the first state hospital in Illinois that had an 8-hour workday.
Trying to bring some normality to it.
Yeah, he removed all mechanical restraints. That is something that we don't do today in our hospitals.
That's correct.
And this man was doing it in 1902, 1917. He
Amazing.
removed all mechanical restraints. He put women workers in the male wards. He was a good guy. I mean,
Trying a lot of very progressive and...
banned narcotics to subdue the patients.
Okay, so no, just put him to sleep.
Yeah. I mean, this guy was ahead of his time. When he retired, he spent the end of his days living on site. Didn't even move.
Wow.
You know? And he commissioned the sundial, and 4 sides of the base have 4 different motto, or what would you call it?
Sayings or like
Yeah,
phrases or
well,
something like that?
principles.
Okay.
And it was 8-hour labor, non-imprisonment, non-restraint, and non-resistance.
Wow.
And
So that place is shut down.
lost funding.
Okay.
You'll get into that. Yeah. So, yeah, Zeller died, and we were able to carry on his ideas for a little bit. Sadly, we don't use his teachings or anything anymore. And Zeller became internationally known. People were coming to us, or him, to learn his ways. And he traveled the world to find out ways to better improve, improve the mentally...
Outcome. I would say,
their lives.
quality of life.
Quality of life.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's not really like an outcome per se, like a cure, but in many instances. So...
and this is just another thing that, to point out. Institutions start off well, and just like a game of telephone, their founders' good intentions fall by the wayside. It happened with Dorothea Dix and the Asylums, and then by, 1902, we start doing this whole cottage plan, which was, again, making sprawling compounds to create more of a community life.
Mm-hmm.
And, but treatment-wise, we're really not much better off in most places. We're still doing the ice baths and
Wow.
terrible things. So, 1913, this is one thing interesting. Counselors aren't really a thing yet. The first time we have counselors is in the early 1900s. Frank Parsons opens up the Bureau of Vocational Guidance in Boston, and it was the first time it kind of took your personality into account for a job. And it's the first time we have people looking at your personalities.
Yep.
And then in 1913, Clifford Beers opens the first mental health clinic in America, and he was also an advocate for a more humane treatment of those institutionalized.
Okay.
And then as we get into the 50s and the 40s, really, we start to see, in the 40s, we start to see, the lobotomy, which, do we all know what the lobotomy is?
Frontal lobotomy.
Yeah, and...
That's why you take part of your brain out, right?
Well, not even take it out. They basically just scramble it.
Like an egg?
I mean, kind of.
Jeez.
Yeah, man, it's not great. And,
That's a nice way to put it. It's not great.
I know, basically...
I'm over here cringing because it's like, ugh.
So, basically they would take and make incisions on the side, and they could go up through the nose too, I think, and they would go in and they would start just cutting up and down with like a butter knife looking like tool or an ice pick, and it was supposed to fix people and make them less violent and stuff like that. And a lot of this comes from a guy named Phineas Gage, and this is like in 1840, or going back a little bit. Phineas Gage is a railroad worker, gets smoked in the head with a railroad tie.
Heard about that,
Lives through the experience, but he's different. And this is like this awakening in the science community, like, holy moly,
what's going on in the brain?
Personality is up here.
Yeah.
You know, like who we are is somewhere up here. So, and that was some of the ideas that led to the lobotomy. The guy that created a lobotomy also got a Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow.
Yeah. The guy that created the shock therapy, the insulin shock therapy, pretty sure also he got a Nobel Peace Prize. So
lucky to be alive now.
So we go from the behavioral, I hate to call it behavioral, we go from the nature therapy, the nurture therapy, to, the moral treatment, that's what it calls. Let's gotta stay on task here. Moral treatment, and then we get into the shock treatments, and then we get the lobotomy.
Yep.
And again, like, we're doing this on all kinds of people.
Regardless of whatever the ailment is, like one size fits all for the treatments.
Yep, and and in the 40s, the VA actually starts paying for the training of counselors and psychologists. So this is also kind of a step in the direction of mental health. In the 50s is when we start seeing the introduction of pharmacology, if you will. The motto of the 50s, with chemistry, life is better. I found that. So this is where lithium thorazine gets created. And the thing with lithium and thorazine is they do a really good job with their respective treatments. Lithium for bipolar, thorazine for schizophrenia. And what happened was the media and the public got wind of this, and it looked like a cure-all. And so all of a sudden they're like, we fixed it. Mental health is no more. And that's exactly the same thing they thought with the shock treatment. The same thing Dorothea Dix thought with the whole moral treatment. And then everyone always thought when they found something new, it was like, we got it.
Yep.
Fixed it all. And also in this time, in the 50s, is with the rise of antibiotics. So now we're able to treat syphilis. So now you have to think the population, the institutions are changing a little bit. Because we're able to cure the syphilis and...
Some of like the, I guess, other issues, like not just the mental health issue, but the other health problems these people would have.
Exactly. Right. And the 50s is also the rise of Freud. And this whole idea of like behavioral health starts to emerge, and lots of people from the private practice leave and go start their own private sector businesses, because now they can open up their little clinics, get the people laying on the couch, talk about their moms, and like make the big bucks, not working in these terrible asylums that they're underpaid, over crammed with people and stuff. So this only added to a work shortage along the state hospitals and the national mental health hospitals. Another drug that came out along these times was...
What's it called?
Mepropamol? No. What is it?
Well, it's not Meprobam, is it now, Chris?
So, big shout out to Chelsea Sage, who helped us do a lot of research for this week's show, and she really tried to help me write down this word.
I think it's meprobamotrol.
Sure. Meprobamol.
I can't read your writing the last part, but I think that's what it's called. So that M word right there.
So anyways, this was called the Peace Pill.
Peace, man.
Yeah, Peace, man. And this was every 1 out of 3 prescriptions was for this drug.
Wow.
Everybody's getting this stuff.
Jeez.
Like taking the Peace Pill.
Man.
And this was the number one selling pill until 1963 when Valium is introduced. And then Valium becomes the number one selling pill from 1963 to 1982.
Wow.
What are you doing, baby boomers?
How many pills?
What are you doing?
Taking those pills.
Taking those pills. So, okay, so in the 50s, again, all these medicines get introduced, and they get hailed as this.
The cures.
We fixed it.
Yep, the fixes for
We
it.
did it.
Yep.
And, again, at the same time, we're doing terrible things to, like, eugenics. We're still caging people. We're still restraining people in other places. We've lost what Zeller had done already by the 50s.
Yep.
It seems like the first generation of goodness cannot pass that on to the second, and they sure as hell can't get it to the third.
Sure.
And I don't get that, but that's repeating. Now, one thing that happened in America was, not in America, but when our soldiers came back from World War II, a lot of them experienced shell shock.
Yep.
And that was the term for PTSD at the time. And that really changed the public's view on mental health on a scale that really hadn't been seen yet. And because so many people we knew were soldiers.
Yeah.
Not we knew.
Yep.
But
varying levels of stress and things that we would probably call PTSD today.
Mm-hmm.
So again, not just one ailment that really one size fits all kind of cure would deal with.
Yep. And so in 1963, the Community Mental Health Act is passed, and that's authorized funding for the development of research centers in university-affiliated facilities for people with mental retardation. And it was the first federal law directed to help people with developmental disabilities.
Wow.
1963. This was Kennedy.
Yep.
And I don't know if people know this, but Kennedy had a sister.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that there was a family member who had something.
Her name was Rosemary Kennedy, and, just reading about her, it doesn't sound like she was necessarily mentally disabled as a very, very free spirit.
Sure.
She would, sneak out of school. The nuns thought she was, being promiscuous. She got kicked out of a school and sent to another.
Yeah.
And when she was 23 years old, her doctor, or the family doctor, recommended to the dad that a lobotomy might be the way to go to fix it. And so the dad snuck her out of the house, and they performed a lobotomy. They did the incision, and they started slicing with the butter knife utensil, and they'd have her do things like recite the Lord's Prayer, and if she would start to not be able to get it out, they would stop cutting. And that was their
test.
That was their test.
Wow.
And so she couldn't even walk out after the procedure, and she had to they sent her to a care facility in Wisconsin after a while, and the family didn't know what happened. The family was told for the longest time that she was made mentally retarded. Dad didn't admit it. And it was when the dad died that the siblings were made aware of where she was and tried to bring her back into their life a little bit more. And by this time, she had gained the ability to speak clearly again, and she was able to walk, but she had a limp. But
that is just terrible. My God.
Yeah. So Kennedy did a lot for mental health.
So he was massively affected by that, of course. And
yeah. This wasn't announced to the public until after Kennedy was president. So, because
stuff like that didn't get out like it does today.
No, when he was running for Senate, they started asking questions, and they said that she was, mentally. They said she was reclusive. That was their excuse for a while. So Kennedy called for a reduction. Can I do a Kennedy impression?
Sure, go for it.
Over a number of years, by hundreds of thousands of people confined to residential institutions, and asked that methods be found to retain and return to the community the mentally ill, there to restore and revitalize their lives through the health programs and strengthened education and rehabilitation services.
Wow. Bravo, sir.
Thank you. I watched
way
him do
better
that
than I could
speech
possibly do.
several times. So basically, he wanted to. he wanted to deinstitutionalize people, and that is what the Community Mental Health Act is better well known for, is deinstitutionalization.
Yeah.
Which is such a big word.
Yeah.
So
that was the start of it.
Yes, it was. And in the 60s, other humanistic theories emerged, and they helped provide the framework for the view of mankind's existence from a holistic approach. And this helps distinguish psychologist from psychiatrist, because these are two very different things. Psychiatrists are doctors. They go through the medical school and then are studying brain behavior, where psychiatrists are more focused on behavioral side, and I am doing a terrible job explaining that. I apologize. So
we're not going to claim to be experts on any of this.
Nope.
This is
Yep.
research and thoughts and all that.
Now, 1976, the American Mental Health Counselor Association is formed, and this helps substantiate and differentiate the mental health counselors as its own valid field and profession.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, counselors aren't really a thing. You know what else really isn't a thing up until like the 60s or 70s? Like retirement homes and nursing homes.
Right.
Like, it's not good.
There wasn't the service industry like we have it today at all. And a lot of those folks were rotting away in their home or being taken care of by family or going on the street.
Yep. And what's scary is today, even dementia is still something that'll get you removed from your nursing home. And I mean, if you're removed so many times, you'll get sent to a state facility.
Right.
And that's our grandparents, our parents.
Get locked away.
Yep.
To rot away.
And we're better. We do better than we did, but they're not great. We're still not great.
Right. The solutions are they're very, very, very incrementally improving.
In 1976, Virginia becomes the first state to offer counselors to seek a license.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is all up to 1976.
Yep.
And I'm going to pass the torch.
I'm going to try not to drop the baton.
Yeah, the one thing I want to say before I'm going to cue you up a little bit is Kennedy, his idea, if my accent ruined it for you, Kennedy's idea was that we needed to get people out of the institutions. We needed to get them into the community.
Yep.
And
instead of the state-run institutions like local community.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And that was a good idea, but it assumed that the communities or the states were going to be ready to pick that up.
Yep.
And they had money, and it still wasn't enough. And
Yep. So when you get into the 80s, I was just looking. I read a neat paper called "Mental Health and Societal Policy." And I'll link that so we can. It was published in 1985, so not the end of the 80s, but I think it gives a really good perspective. And reading some other folks' material in this time frame, I think it pretty much summarizes what the 80s was like. And like Chris was saying, they had money, funds to support these state institutions. They were trying to drive more of it to the community level. But the provision of service really was complicated by the fact that the funding was all jacked up,
Yep.
To a large extent. Costs got shifted all the time between different levels of government because one didn't want to have the burden anymore, so they'd move the money to another, but it wasn't as much as what was had before, so they were playing the budget game, right? So the money was there, but where it was going toward and how much for the right things was just all kinds of mucked up. There was not really any kind of unified adherence to a way to provide with the resources, especially to the chronically ill population, which is something you were alluding to earlier. A lot of this stuff does not have, I don't know what you would call a cure, an end in sight, really. It's something you manage, hopefully, and you find a way to live, but it's never, and so I think I would classify that as being chronically ill. And so what I was finding in my research is most of the state funding is going to state hospitals that really focus on a minority of the total population that have mental illness or things you would classify as some kind of mental illness or thing that you would need support for.
Sure.
So without that, you've got the majority of folks, all the money's going to these institutions, and it's not even serving the majority of the people out there. And so...
It's an echoing problem.
Yeah, I know. It just keeps going on, and I think it's really just the fact that there was not a major effort to centralize it, to organize it, right, and to make sure that there was some kind of like standard way of learning and disseminating the knowledge, right?
Because I mean, if the whole Elizabeth Packard was in 1860, and that was your husband could have a wife committed for arguing with her and for hysteria, which wasn't even a real thing. I mean, there is a massive stigma still up until this point in history.
Yeah, and I mean the stigma I think has even up into where I'm talking in the 80s is still massively there.
Massively there, and people don't want to see counselors.
Right, and so yeah, even if the resources available, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit it. This generation, I remember my grandfather, my grandmother. These not folks that just sat there and poured their heart out and like all their feelings deep down inside. And I think largely that may have been what contributed to the problems that they were experiencing. But at the same time, they went through a lot, whether it be poverty, whether it be war, whether it be whatever. I mean, it just a lot went on at that time. So in the 80s, you've got this finance issue that just kind of bleeds through all the problems that they're having. And there was a lot of resistance to closing obsolete institutions like what you were referencing. And instead of having those in those state institutions, spending that money in the community, little more type residences in each community, so they had a support structure there with more of their families. I think that idea is kind of pervasive in this. It's interesting. I was reading that in the 80s, the number of patients residing in mental hospitals and their stay in mental hospitals was declining. Okay, overall, but the number of admissions for mental illness in general hospitals and their length of stay was going up. So leaving the mental institutions and starting to fill into the general hospitals and centers out there. Right?
Arguably less equipped.
Right, definitely less equipped. There's training, there's resources, but especially in this time frame, there really was no focus to deliver that. And then to compound that, the other massive thing that you had playing a role in the 80s was, and I'm sure it still is the case, there was a big disparity in the level of care between those that were insured and those who were not insured. Right, the people that are insured get, the best care, the right amount of care, and very specific to what their problem is. The people that are uninsured get a pamphlet, saying, hey, here's the resources we can provide to you and the minimal amount of care to get you out the door, especially in the general hospital care setting.
And we're in the 80s.
This time frame.
Yeah, so insurance isn't even covering your counsel. If you have to go see a counselor, that's not covered.
Correct. And I'm talking about the hospital stay side of this, right?
Sure.
Where you would get, especially in the general hospital this time, you're not going to get a lot of information. So like you're saying, say you are part of the insured population, your hospital stays taken care of, you can't go to a counselor and get that taken care of. That's out of pocket.
Out of pocket.
And so there was no thought that should be an available resource to people, right? Because it wasn't even thought that it should be part of in the healthcare system.
That's just so wild.
For insurance.
Yeah. And it's just amazing to me that this has been an issue in this country, a notable issue for...
Well, Kennedy in the 60s, like you said, in 63, signed the Community Mental Health Act, and that was kind of what sparked things off from federal level support.
So I didn't mention this in Dorothea Dix.
Excuse me.
So I'm going to do it real quick. 1853, Dorothea Dix took her case federal to the federal government, and she proposed an idea of putting millions of acres of public lands in a trust, and that the income from that trust would go to helping the mentally ill.
Yep.
And this is in 1853. It passes both the House and the Senate. It gets vetoed by Franklin Pierce.
Yeah.
Come on, like,
I know.
and then
There's
Kennedy.
a chance.
Yeah, and then literally, that's 1853. Then we get to Kennedy.
90 years later.
Right, and there's really not a whole bunch.
Yeah. So after
of
63,
good things.
I'm in the 80s, right?
Yep.
And then in 1980, Jimmy Carter launched a study. Basically, try to find what he put in place here. The President's Commission on Mental Health. And basically from that, there were recommendations for what needed to be done to prop up the mental health care system within the communities across America. So basically, Jimmy, I love that name, Jimmy.
Jimmy, peanut farmer.
Oh yeah, I love that too.
Mm-hmm.
He was a farmer. So Jimmy, the peanut farmer, had helped to ensure the passage of the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980, which sought greater integration of programs for people with serious mental illness.
Yep.
That was really the focus of it. Providing grants to community health care centers, and following that 78 President's Commission, so that they could improve the health care, right? So the Reagan administration comes in and almost immediately...
Came in like a wrecking ball.
1981, yep. They come in like a wrecking ball and repealed practically every bit of that Mental Health Systems Act that was part of the funding. I think it was like $800 million that the Carter administration had earmarked over 4 years, and
yep.
I think most of that was wiped out. Now, basically, the Reagan administration's take was they were going to push that responsibility onto the states. They wanted the states to take the burden and to set up,
and now we're talking
infrastructure.
Now, unlike Kennedy, we're not talking about now we're talking about the financial burden.
Right.
Like,
just offloading.
Before it was the organizational level,
yep.
the care, the treatment.
Yep.
Now we're talking about, okay, now that you do that, now pay for it too.
Now we're taking away the money.
Yep.
And so, you had that massive deinstitutionalization that went on through the 70s and into the 80s, and so you're depending upon the communities to organize all this, but they weren't ready to take all that on, and so you have these massive issues where there's rampant homelessness,
yes,
the overcrowding of the facilities.
So Chelsea used to be a psychiatric nurse. Now she's a nurse educator, and some of the people she worked with used to work at the Zellers. I guess it was a mental hospital,
mm-hmm.
and they said when this happened, they had to go to work from there at the hospital, a place that had, many beds to a place that had like very few beds at the general hospital, and they said the saddest thing was on their way to work, they would see their former patients just on the streets. They were just homeless. We literally did nothing for these people. We kicked them out and made them homeless.
Well, it's not only enough where if you don't have any money, right, to have mental problems, and then you're poor, right? Yeah. You can't afford any kind of health care. And so, I think I was reading that some commentators in the media just referred to this as the crazy on the streets, right?
Yeah.
And, there at this time, there were some reasonably effective antipsychotic and antidepressant medications, but, many of them had serious side effects, and patients just didn't want to take them,
yep.
And so in place of that, you had them taking street drugs and drinking alcohol, and so that, along with their issues, kind of just proliferated more and more problem on the street and across these institutions that are just packed,
yep.
the ones that were open and available to people. So I think really that kind of sums up the 80s. We want to shift into, unless you have anything else to add to that, I'll kind of want to shift into the 90s and talk about the, what do they call it? The decade of the brain. H.W. Bush, so not W, but H.W. He basically proclaimed the 1990s as the decade of the brain, to focus attention on the neurosciences and the benefits of brain research, to basically figure out, like you said, they way earlier had figured out that this was a part of the brain and something that was going on in folks' heads, but there wasn't a lot of major focus on that and in the biological factors of mental health.
Yeah.
And so, basically, so far that we've talked about using medication, psychotherapy, cognitive therapy, Freudian, and psychodynamic emphases that were in the past. So, we're talking about now getting into Prozac, right? And using other kind of, I'm not even going to use these fancy science terms in my notes here, but different types of inhibitors to really affect the brain using through this research.
One thing I'd like to point
please,
out
go for
there is everything you listed doesn't include of course they don't include syphilis on there anymore. The definition or the group that are people with brain tumors are not on this list anymore.
Yep.
We are narrowing the scope of what mentally ill is.
It's focusing on depression. I mean, largely within this time frame.
Right.
And I would say that we'll get into more of today, but
I think it's interesting that as things we can understand or treat, as we understood them, it makes sense that they were not classified as mental illness anymore. But I just think there's something to be said about that. Mental illness is something we still greatly don't understand. There could be spectrums that we don't even know exist yet that people could be on.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, you get into things that are not mental illness in the sense of inability to function, because you can't comprehend. But autism, talk about a spectrum of different things. I mean, you have everything from folks that are completely functional, they just have some things about them that they struggle with, to folks that really can't function without some sort of assistance. And I think that again, autism wasn't even a thing that was hardly discussed when we were kids, and we're not that old.
No. I watched this documentary all about the asylums. I have to throw this out there. I wanted to rent this documentary, and so I looked it up. Can't really rent it. I got it from ICC, local community college, GA, and but to buy it, it was $126.
Wow!
For a 1-hour documentary.
Don't want to share that knowledge with the masses, I guess.
Yeah. I mean,
wow, that's crazy. $126
for an hour-long DVD.
Is it printed on gold?
It was not great. I do not believe it was gold.
Wow.
No, I do not. But anyways, I found a copy, local community college, which was awesome.
Cool.
And so, go searching. And this guy talks about how he was part of the whole deinstitutionalization in the 80s. So much as when they documentary. And he said, do I feel bad that it led to so many people being on the streets? Obviously, yes, that wasn't the intention, but some of the things they suffered, they were going to suffer in the institutions they were in anyways. So no one would have saw it if they would have been in the institutions. And I like that theory, but the problem is we see it now, we're still not doing a whole bunch about it. So
lots of people like to talk about it, just not put it into practice.
California has staggering numbers of homeless people, and you can extrapolate from that a large number of those people are mentally ill. And the fact of the matter is there's always going to be people incapable of functioning in society. And what do? We have to have asylums. We have to have those things.
Well, at least some sort of institution to help provide support. So I was pardon me, I was talking about Prozac and more drugs 90s. Getting dumped out there in the market. And so that's focused on depression treatment, right? And so although they're not really a lot more effective than prior antidepressants, they were more acceptable to patients because of the side effects, that there was lesser side effects. And so it kind of increased that usage by threefold, right? And so you have more primary care physicians prescribing it more often for depression and anxiety, even though it may be contrary to certain practice standards. So you get more and more proliferation, kind of like the opioid epidemic thing that we've been talking about, right? And so this heavy use in prescription it did drive, the pharmaceutical industry. They aggressively marketed. I remember being a kid, and you probably still see Prozac commercials. Yeah,
what was it, the Cloud or a little?
Yeah, I
do you not enjoy the things you used to enjoy?
There were different iterations of that sucker, and
does pizza not taste good anymore?
I think that was right in the era when they started ask your doctor about
Right.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
You know, and be on the lookout and let your doctor know if you experience all these
Yep.
symptoms and whatever else. It's just like, you don't need, that's what the doctor's there for, to tell you what you need to take care of you, not you sit there and say, hey, doc, I think I need
saw
some...
this commercial.
Yeah. Let
That told me all the symptoms.
let the people selling the drugs tell me what I need to take.
Yeah. Right.
I'm going to self-diagnose myself. You know, so I talked about a lot more usage of the drugs that were being prescribed, but adherence really was still a problem, and I think that medication costs were, you know, part of that too. If you don't have a lot of the resources, you know, if you're struggling with mental illness and you know, don't have a very high-paying job or can only do certain tasks, you know, if the medication costs are high, you're going to pay for food and a place to stay before you do your medicine, and you might not take it as often as you should.
And we're still not covering counseling or
Right.
other behavioral.
Right. I'm just strictly talking about, you know, medicine and I guess standard supported things on your health, you know, your insurance.
Yeah.
Not things that are add-ons, you know, that you might get lucky if they're covered, even today. So another thing that happened in the 90s kind of became dominant was the impact of managed behavioral health care. So a lot of these larger institutions sort of, they brought together case management.
Yep.
Where basically they started to standardize things more with how things were delivered. Not entirely, but just managing more of a personal case-by-case basis. It wasn't completely a noble cause. You know, there were certainly some impacts to this that were positive for the hospitals, right? Reduced length of stay because you're kind of like becoming a machine. You're churning and burning with those people coming in and figuring out what's wrong with them and getting them out. You know, so they were able to reduce the cost that they had to incur for processing those patients. They also found that when they had case management, they were able to reduce the number of psychiatrists and psychologists on staff and shift those to more case management type resources and support staff. So another, you know, bad thing, they're spreading the doctors more thin, and so they're not able to provide the same level of care for those patients that they had. You know, it's kind of like what you experience in your primary care physician today with insurance providers. Hey, you get 15 minutes of these people, get these things done, and get the hell out of there. On to the next one. You have a massive caseload. So, you know, I think that again it just sort of proliferated, you know, that trend of we're kind of stagnating. We're not making any massive progress toward, you know, we are making little incremental bits here, but never that, you know, that silver bullet that just kind of gets us the right level of care, especially for the chronically ill.
Yeah.
I've been talking a lot, you know.
I'm gonna ask a question since we're
go for it.
You know, I think the issue is that there is no silver bullet.
Well, yeah, there's no perfect solution, at least in all cases.
And this is the problem. This is a huge topic where it's not one. There's no one cure to fix all mental illness, and it's hard to get people to focus on big issues.
Well, and
complex issues
with the kind of support, because it's money, but it's. I was listening to that documentary you'd sent me about how even if, you know, we had the money to have all the institutions and everything else we need, there's not enough providers. Like the mental health providers, there's, I think, a very small fraction of those compared to everybody else, like in the general health care. You know, like ear, nose, and throat and all the other specialties. There's so many fewer proportionate to the patient loads that even if we could have all these places for people to go, there wouldn't be enough people to take care of. So there's like an infrastructure issue with that. Facilities aren't there. It's just a much wider issue. You know, so when you talk about the challenges ahead, you know, getting into the 2000s, and I mean, I'm talking about, I think of that as the present still. I mean, 2000s, you know, I kind of missed some things that happened in the 90s in terms of legislation. Let me kind of take a step back here. So we talked about The Decade of the Brain from George Bush.
Yep.
He signed the Americas with Disabilities Act.
Yep.
So that helped to provide. It prohibited discrimination against folks with disabilities, including mental illness. So that was a good step in the right direction there. Yep. Bill Clinton signed the Mental Health Parity Act to begin addressing disparities in coverage for mental illness. So not exactly. We'll get into something else later that kind of took it across the finish line. That was kind of the start of it. Yeah. Well, you know what I mean in terms of that part of it.
Yep.
George W. Did a Freedom Commission on Mental Health, and basically that brought about some recommendations, especially related to young children and the youth living with mental illness, trying to provide better outcomes earlier on once things are diagnosed. He also signed the Mentally Ill Offender Treatment and Crime Reduction Act, which basically provided resources to communities to provide alternatives to incarceration.
Sure.
So instead of locking people up, and trying to address that with treatment and different facilities, and look at the different types of medical conditions that people had. And then getting into 2010 and beyond, more of today, even though we're right up against 2020 next year, which is crazy.
We're in 20s.
Yeah. President Obama signed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which extended federal mental health parity to Medicaid managed plans and to qualified health plans that offered through insurance-placed marketplaces and exchanges. So expanding what Clinton had put in place to specifically across the industry.
Yeah.
Now, not to say it's perfect, because there's a lot of loopholes I was hearing about that companies can still kind of play with this and how they code things with their appointments. Go ahead.
It assured that, equal coverage.
Equal coverage available.
Right.
And
right. But that means you could now go see a counselor.
Right. A lot more of the stuff that would have been add-ons before is provided. Not everything. Depends on your plan.
The biggest complaint I have with this is how often do you go see your regular doctor? Maybe once a year.
Yeah, hopefully once a year.
And you might go to a counselor once a week. And why would you think the copay should be equal?
Well, and that's just it. I mean, you're going to rack up however much that is per week over the course of a year, right? So 52 weeks. You could be $500 if it's $10 or more,
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of money for the support you need on an ongoing basis.
And it's going to be...
And it's preventative to a certain extent. You could argue that.
And how are low-income families going to afford this?
Yeah. And especially for those folks that are living with, on the poverty line or don't have a ton of resources, again, you're going to choose to pay for daycare and gas for your car and everything else you need before you're taking care of yourself a lot of times.
Yeah, but you wouldn't do that with your broken arm.
No, because you couldn't work.
Right.
And I think that people somehow feel like they don't have... And that, again, it's stigma. It's people feeling ashamed, And
I'm going to throw out this other one, which I don't need to add to the fire, but I think the other thing is the mistrust. I mean, I think people understand that we don't know exactly what's going on yet.
Yeah. Well, and you go talk to your provider and talk about what you need, and then are they judging me?
Yeah.
And how, am I going to get what I need out of this? So I think that's a good point.
You're a hunter, are you worried about them taking your guns?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly you don't want to be felt like people are worried about your mental stability, because you certainly won't have any of that. And I mean, to a certain extent, rightfully so. If you are mentally unstable, I don't necessarily want you having 50 guns in your house. That's a lot of guns anyway. But I'm just saying, I think that to a certain extent, we gotta be reasonable. Like, seriously, if for some reason I was mentally impaired, I would definitely want someone to take the access to my weapons away from me.
Yep.
That's for sure.
I got you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yep.
Make sure Courtney gets that away from me.
Yep.
So, I've been kind of leading up to where we're at today. And I think it's important to state that right now, our jails really are housing the large majority of the mentally ill out there. They're winding up in jails and prisons. There are still state institutions, of course, that are housing folks. There are local community institutions too that are
Yep.
working with folks and trying more progressive treatments. Now, one thing I would say, the current administration is certainly saying a lot of good things in terms of wanting to provide support. Maybe not for necessarily the right reasons,
Yeah.
especially with mass shootings, pointing the finger at mental health as the culprit. I think the statistics really speak for themselves that the mentally ill are largely non-violent in terms of extreme violence like that. Not to say it doesn't happen.
I hear you, and I get frustrated because, gosh, I read both sides of like the subjects now, and it's just you hear complaints on both sides. Like Trump's talking about doing red flag,
Yep. Laws.
laws.
Yeah.
Thank you, and the Democrats are saying, well, he's going to use this to take advantage of the mentally ill. There's a cricket outside.
Yeah.
I wish you could hear it, because that is the sound
Yeah.
I think best exemplifies my thoughts on that. Where
That's pretty ridiculous.
it is, and there needs to be a.
And the other side too is they're saying that, well, no, you can't have any of these more laws to do that. You'll take away my guns. It's like, if you have a red flag, I want your guns taken away.
Yes.
If you can't fly in an airplane, you should damn well not have your guns.
And the Democrats just are arguing that red flags are unless they're properly defined and stuff like that. Which
it's like, come on, people, we need to take some steps in the right direction on that for sure.
Yes.
That was a whole other podcast that I hope everyone goes back and listens to. A lot of good material on that. But the current administration, they're calling for a lot of mental health care reform, particularly after mass shootings, which, that's not the right venue or topic to segue into when it comes to a mass shooting. Mental health care is its own thing that needs to be dealt with. And it is a broken system still in many regards. There's a lot of great progress that's been made, but so the administration is saying, hey, we want to do healthcare reform, but we're going to continually seek to cut support for mental health care through the Medicaid budget, right? Been going after that.
Yep.
Adding work requirements to obtain Medicaid support, which if you have, and basically adding those requirements means you have to work harder to get your exemptions if you can't work. And so that means more folks are going to not have access, and for sure, they're not going to have access to health care because they're going to fall into this gray area and not get the right exemptions and get their Medicaid coverage. And people are going to be pushed to, so the administration has been pushing to enhance short-term limited duration plans. So the plan with the Obama administration through the Affordable Health Care Act would be that there would be short-term plans, limited duration healthcare coverage plans available, but they were meant to be that short duration, 6 months to get you by before or until you could get a longer-term stable plan in place. The Trump administration has been pushing these short-term plans and extending the amount of time people can remain on these, and they are cheaper, but they don't, and that by doing that, they're undermining the population that is a part of the full-blown healthcare exchanges. So less people there, raising those premium costs, right? And so more people stay on the cheaper plans, but the cheaper plans don't cover anything beyond basic healthcare. So no mental health care support whatsoever is part of those at all. So if you go to the doctor, go to a counselor, go to anything, acupuncture, that's not covered. That's straight out of pocket. Last thing, and then I'll let you talk.
No, I don't have anything. I'm just blown away.
Overall, the administration, the icing on the cake is they're hell-bent. It's on the back burner now, but they want to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act.
Yeah.
So if you do that, then you're cutting millions off of the entire network.
I'm not being objective here, but I'm throwing this out there. My fear with Trump is he's done so little to divest himself from his interest. His tax cuts benefited the 1% more, and the corporation aspect is anything that stayed around. What is he going to do when he doesn't have to worry about getting reelected?
Well, that's what we've heard recent reports that he's telling, as soon as I get reelected, go ahead, confiscate land for the wall building. I will pardon you when they go after you. And then, we're also gonna cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid.
Yep.
Massive cuts to their budget. Now, of course, that's speculation. Haven't heard it from his own lips. But given his record on I promised this and then delivered that, I would not be surprised.
That's my fear. That is my honest.
Yeah.
That is my biggest fear besides the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Well,
let's wrap up the topic and do a couple news things.
Yep.
So mental health from the 1600s to Trump.
Here's where we are.
Hour and 15 minutes. I can see the clock.
Yep, and we have a long way to go, folks. We have made some great strides.
There's so much we didn't talk about.
Yeah, well, there's probably gonna have to be a chapter 2 on this, on a couple different things. Thank you very much to Chelsea.
Yeah.
For providing a lot of insight.
Almost got her to be a guest. This close.
Yeah, we'll work up to it.
Yep.
Got to get her on here and have her give us her thoughts. Super. Yeah. She's got some good stuff, and she's hilarious too. So I think she'd be good to have on here.
I sure like her. What about? Do you want to? Are you good with next week's topic? We announcing?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I think next week we're going to piggyback off this one a little bit, and we're going to talk about Big Pharma.
Yep.
We hear a lot about it.
Tons to unpack there. It'll be really good. I have so many opinions.
I do too. And it'll still tie into the mental health.
And we're going to unload some things that we were positive you don't know.
That's the truth of it. So tune in next week for that. Now, a couple of things I wanted to say. This show's going to go up on Monday. That's when Hurricane Dorian is supposed to make landfall on the southeast coast.
Yep.
And they're talking like 130 to 140 mile per hour winds.
Sustained winds, like a Category 4.
Category 4?
This is a huge storm that's heading for Florida.
It's going to hit the Bahamas.
I am so sad by that. I love going to Florida.
Yeah, I hope you guys in the Bahamas are okay. I hope...
everybody in the path of this thing. Please, if you can, get out. If you have evacuation orders...
Stay safe. There's no evacuation orders of the time of filming this show.
Yeah.
We film on Fridays, so... polls.
Yep, they've been changing.
Polls, they have been a-changing.
Yep, we're going to have to talk about the top Democratic candidates pretty soon.
Yeah, and I'm bringing this up and I can't back it up, but the lineup for the next debate has been announced for CNN.
10 people on stage?
Yes. Who was it? CNBC maybe? I don't remember who does it. I think it's still a CNN one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so check that out. I think we might do a viewing party.
Oh man, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
If you're interested, let us know. It'd be cool to get some feedback to see if it'd be worth putting together and get some folks to sit and provide commentary, and it'd be a good time. I know that for sure.
Yeah. Open to both sides. And anything else? Well, the other big thing in the polls, Biden, Bernie, Warren, all sitting at 20.
Yeah,
according
roughly.
to a poll, Politico. But I tell you, I get really frustrated. There's some really nasty hit pieces out there on Biden, and some of them are just baseless. Vice News did one that was below the belt, claiming that if you are for universal health care, then it's an insult to his dead son. And Vice claimed that he said this in a campaign ad. I watched the campaign ad. He says nothing of the sort. He says, it's personal to him, and he believes in the Affordable Care Act. I think that's respectable. Fight for what you believe in.
Yeah.
I think that's nice.
Well, we're entering the time of the smears.
I know.
The smear campaigns and...
Well, and my thing with Biden, though, he's shooting himself in the foot.
Well, I was going to say,
you don't need to help him.
He's going to probably do himself in.
I feel bad for him.
Talking about things.
I feel guilty saying I feel bad for him, but I don't think he looks good. I don't think he's...
I told you offline that I thought that, more and more that he's probably not... He probably is going to drop... He needs to drop out at some point. I mean...
I promise you he will not.
He won't.
Unless he just
No.
Boom.
No, something major will have to happen. I mean, I still believe right now he will be the one who gets the nomination and runs against Trump. I'm today 80% sure of that.
My dad, thanks Dad, sent me an article saying interview with John Kasich.
Yep.
I think it was Political Change.
Yep.
But saying he sees no.
Yep. He's not going to do it.
Clear way to beat Trump.
Yep. He's not going to do it.
This is my issue, though. When I said this to my dad, he's not talking about beating Trump. He's talking about him winning the presidency.
Really?
And, he says, I just don't see a way to win. And that's very different from not seeing a way to beating Trump. If he wants to beat Trump, he could run as a third party. And my dad brought up, if you're going to go to all that work, spend all that money and time away from your family, you would think you would want to win. And I get that, and that's absolutely fair.
Yep.
But there is a difference between a road to winning and a road to beating Trump. I think a strong third-party Republican guy running out there, get Mitt Romney to go third party.
Yeah, he's too comfortable.
You don't think he'd steal some of the vote?
No. Whoever would do that, yes, would steal some of the vote.
Yeah.
But Mitt Romney, I don't think he'd be the time for him. It's not good. He's too comfortable in the Senate, I believe. Maybe down the road, though. Would not be surprised at that.
They're getting too old.
I know. I'm tired of the same names.
I am, too.
It's one of the major draws for Mayor Pete, who I still like to a large extent. Now, granted, you could argue he hasn't really handled his little mishap at home base so well, so...
Well, and also I was reading about Cortez, AOC's mouthing off about the Electoral College.
Yeah.
I don't like the Electoral College. I get the idea. The Republicans argue that without the Electoral College, states would be non-important, non-existent. Politicians would only go to California, New York, the places with the big population centers, and that would really discredit the rural states and stuff.
I mean, sure, you can make an argument for that. But...
So she turned that argument on them and said, well, what about the Republicans in the blue states?
Yeah.
If we get rid of the Electoral College, everyone's vote matters equally.
Yeah. Well, popular vote doesn't matter today. I mean, there's been candidates recently who have won the popular vote, but not the presidency.
No way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to be a thing that keeps happening to the Democrats.
And on that note,
I
think it's time to end.
That sounds good. Guys, it's 77 degrees in here. That's our cue.
It's time to get out of this hot box.
Out of the hot box. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed, hopefully not a too convoluted tour and historical journey about mental health in America. There's so
more
much
to come.
Talk about.
Yeah, there's just too much to cram into an hour and 22 minutes.
So much that we didn't talk about even in the research we did. So, if we missed anything, if we got something wrong, let us know.
Yeah.
If you wanted us to do a show, if you had an idea for a show, let us know. And I hope you tune in next week when we tackle what is Big Pharma.
Yeah.
So.
All they're in that, too.
Yeah, I hope you're enjoying your Monday, everyone, assuming this is out then. And if you're enjoying your Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday, either you're a slacker or I failed at getting this uploaded.
Hopefully the former.
Yep.
All right, guys. Thanks. Take care.
Have a nice day. Have a nice week.